crush.
Two amazing guests today. First, Jimmy Dore comes in a few minutes, and then Michael Catherwood, my Loveline co-host, will join us. The Chiron from Michael is going to read best looking and most well-equipped radio and television personality.
Nice.
So, Jimmy Dore, of course, you guys know him. He is the author of Your Country Is Just Not That Into You, host of The Jimmy Dore Show. You can watch on Rumble, The Jimmy Dore Show, D-O-R-E. Follow on X, Jimmy_Dore, D-O-R-E. And guess what? Jimmy, my last interview got taken down and suspended from Spotify the same week that Candace Owens gets suspended by YouTube. Now, because we have Caleb Nation in there fighting on our behalf, he was able to get us reinstated. But evidently, Jimmy discussed some three-letter agencies involved in some of the problems going on in the eastern part of the European continent, and that was too much for them. So more of that to follow. Don't go away.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
Joint and muscle pains are exhausting and frustrating, but I've got a over-the-counter medication I want to introduce you to that provides great relief using the power of, check it out, chili peppers. Capsidin is made with a proprietary formula that contains no non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, no opioids, no anesthetic or steroid, nothing, no chance for addiction, no side effects, no chance it's going to interact with other medication you might be taking. Capsidin contains capsaicin, which is the substance in chili peppers that burns your tongue. That gives you that burny feeling. And of course, I've recommended capsaicin creams to patients over the years, but other capsaicin creams burn your skin. That's what makes capsidin so unique. In clinical trials, capsidin has actually been demonstrated not to burn.
I've been using capsidin to relieve my pain in my hands and my wrist from carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis. The results have been amazing. I use it every day during my show, and I highly recommend it.
Get the pain relief you need from various sources, even backache, sprains, bruises even. Order now at capsidin.com/Drew to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. That is CAPSADYN, capsidin.com/DREW. And our friends at Capsidin have something special today. I can find my wife now by following the jars of Capsidin, the way you follow breadcrumbs, you know what I'm saying? And so she is so into this stuff, and she has a special offer today.
Yeah, I was told that if you use the live code, LIVE, you'll get a bigger discount.
Bigger than the Drew code?
Yes.
Okay, so just use the live code when you check through at Capsidin.
No, I think you need to use both, but we need to double check.
Okay, well, once you clarify that, people can mess around with it. If you find out, put it up on the Rumble Rants. To me, I think it's going to be an extra 10% if you use live as opposed to Drew, but we'll see. Maybe it's Drew and then live. Whatever it is, it's a good opportunity.
I do like the capsidin also for bug bites. I know it's that time of year where you go outside, you get bitten at dinner, and I rubbed it on, and I swear
I know.
It works so well.
You use it for everything.
Because I get bitten all the time by those little baby mosquitoes, and they itch so much, and I put that on, and it goes right away.
Remember, the big advantage of this one is it's a capsaicin that doesn't cause irritation. So she uses it on rashes and things that bother her.
In your joints and it's really good. I like it.
We'll see about that.
Well, that's
up
what
to
I use.
you.
I use it for my carpal tunnel.
Yes, I can see where that would work. Nerve pain definitely works for that. All right, here we go. Let's, as I said, Mike Catherwood will join us maybe around the bottom of the hour somewhere. He, of course, co-hosted Loveline with me from 2010 to 2016. He has the Mikey Likes You podcast. You can follow him nope, not on X. I think he's on Instagram, but he'll tell us about that in a minute. But right now, it's my pleasure to bring Jimmy Dore back. As I said, get the book, Your Country Is Not Just That Into You. Check out the Jimmy Dore Show. I did not mention there's also JimmyDore.com, JimmyDore.com. And on X, Jimmy_Dore, and also on Rumble, the Jimmy Dore Show. Jimmy, welcome back.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with something that you were going crazy, not going crazy on, you were getting deep into on your show, the statin controversy. And you were in that conversation, you are both right and wrong. But, and I'll tell you why, hang on. I know you like to learn things, so I'll bring it all the way around. But you put your finger on something really important without saying it, and I want to make that explicit, the two of us here today. So maybe you want to just briefly brush by your frame and your concern about statins and their overutilization.
Well, I first heard of Dr. Melhorta, who is a leading cardiologist from the UK, talk about.
He's been on this show a number of times. He's a friend. We know Asim very well. Yep.
Yeah, so he sounded the alarm about statins, and then I read this blog called The Midwestern Doctor, and he did a deep dive into cholesterol and statins, and it turns out lots of side effects with statins. Something like over 30% of the people who start statins get off them because of the side effects. And he's said that some of the side effects include, that it could contribute to dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. And I know, and even to amnesia, things like that. So that seems, Alzheimer's is a relatively new disease for human beings, and that makes sense if that's connected to that and the explosion of it. And then. Also, that cholesterol is not the boogeyman that people make it out to be. I know this first.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm going to get into. And I know you've been able to control your cholesterol with mild dietary changes, and your calcium score is completely zero, which is really the where the rubber hits the road in this whole thing. Which is, by the way, there's something called bad science. If you ever interviewed. I'm blanking on her name. It'll come to me in a minute. But you ought to interview her, because she really goes deep on where science is poor. It's just poor science. And you point out that originally both sugar and cholesterol were considered to be some of the sources of the injury to the endothelial lining of our arteries, and that cholesterol deposition is perhaps the body trying to repair itself, like a scar. Yes?
Yes.
Well, you didn't go far enough with the sugar. The sugar and insulin excess may be the inciting culprit in a lot of people. So it turns out that sugar story is much more complicated and much more significant than we have been led to believe in the recent years. If you want to read about lipids, Peter Attia gets into it really in a way that can be easily digested in his book, Outlive. It's the best summary of lipid studies and metabolism I've ever seen, and it's presented in a way that you can understand it. And so the issue on the cholesterol and the LDL lipid itself is a function it falls into several categories. You are looking at, does it prevent heart disease, right? And does it increase overall survival? Those were the two things you were looking at, right? And it increases overall survival by like 5 days, right? And correct?
I think it was 4 days.
And right. And it does, and we don't even know if that's a significant finding. And it doesn't really significantly change the incidence of heart disease in and of itself. But that is a different consideration than progression of heart disease, right? People, if your calcium score had been elevated, putting you on a statin has a whole different sort of frame for study and for effect and for what the outcomes are likely to be. So I'm going to argue that it still has utility in people with heart disease in terms of preventing future events, in terms of preventing the inflammation in the arteries. And there's all kinds, you can really get into the weeds on this. There's all kinds of plaques that develop in coronary arteries, and each one should have kind of a little bit of a different approach. But that's a totally different question than you were asking. But what I want to get at is the issue that medicine has become dogma, centralized, bureaucratic, and what are called used to be called clinical pathways, where doctors are just told what to do given a certain setup, both by hospitals who are often their employees and the legal structure standing over their head, and even the insurance companies, and of course the electronic medical record. That, to me, is the evil empire at work. What do you think?
Oh, I agree 100%. And so, I became aware of all this during COVID, right? So there was lots of people who were being prescribed, for instance, ivermectin, and then there were from a doctor, and then there were pharmacists that were refusing to fill those prescriptions. Now, ivermectin is on the WHO list of essential medicines. It won the Nobel Prize for medicine. It's a super safe. It's a medicine, and the reason why it was demonized during COVID was because if it could treat COVID, then the pharmaceuticals couldn't get their emergency use authorization for the vaccine. So they had to say that didn't work. They had to say that hydroxychloroquine and any other thing, vitamin D, nothing. They couldn't say anything works because if anything could treat it, they couldn't get there and they'd lose a couple $100 billion. And so when I got hip to that, you can't believe the control they have. And so I couldn't understand, why would certain doctors not go along with this? Well, it's because the head of medical organizations take money from pharmaceutical industries and big insurance companies, and so they then send out the dictates. And so the head of medical organizations send out the dictates because they're corrupted, and then the doctors have to follow them. And my personal doctor who treated me during COVID. She was told not to use steroids at the beginning of COVID, and she used it anyway. She broke the rules. And they came to get her in trouble. And she said, hey, my patients are living, your patients are dying. And 6 months later, they reversed that rule and said, okay, you can go ahead and use steroids. And so it turned out my doctor was right. So my doctor was on the forefront of this. And I've been treated by a handful of doctors who are on the forefront of pushing back. And so I thought the same thing about ivermectin when then I got vaccine injured and I was entered into a study. And the doctor that was leading the study put me on ivermectin. And I was like, hey, this is that horse dewormer thing. And then he explained to me what I just explained to you, that no, they're demonizing this for a certain reason. This is over the counter in certain countries. This has been prescribed billions of times. It's super safe. It's safer than Tylenol. Don't worry about it. And then I was like, oh, and then that woke me up to everything. And that's when I found out that they were lying to us about everything when it came to COVID. They were lying about the origin of the virus, who funded the virus. They were lying about masks. They were lying about contraction. They were lying about transmission. They were lying about herd immunity. They were lying about natural immunity. There wasn't a thing that they didn't lie about. And then I found out that the medical journals, even the British medical journal, they're advertised through big pharma. They have a stranglehold on those things. And so it's amazing to watch the corruption that's inside big medicine. And that's why people don't trust the CDC anymore. I saw a stat the other day that 50% of the country doesn't even trust. And they, by the way, they shouldn't. And that's what's interesting and exciting to me, not to change the subject, about Bobby Kennedy, when he gave a speech at a Trump rally, and he talked about getting the corruption out of the FDA and the CDC and our captured regulatory agencies, and fighting big agra and cleaning up our water and our food supply and fighting childhood obesity. And what's the important thing is, people say to me, well, Jim, you don't really think Trump's going to do that. I go, it doesn't matter to me if Trump's going to do that as much as it matters that there was a stadium full of Republican voters who were cheering on traditional Democratic values, things that I would cheer on, they were cheering on. And that's the thing that's threatening to the establishment, Dr. Drew, is that if the populist left and the populist right realize we have more in common that divides us, then we could come together and fight the oligarchy, because that's what's needed right now to save our democracy. And they don't want you to know that. They want to keep dividing us. And there's a million ways that they do that. But anyway, I got a little bit off track, but I hope I answered your question.
You did. You put a lot in there. I want to respond to some of it. Brett Weinstein, yesterday, the day before, was talking about how COVID created shows like yours and mine and his, and that they were a shock to the elites, and that they thought they could just have their way, and they didn't realize this alternative media would show up. And he was making the case that what everyone needs to watch out for right now are traps. essentially fake stories that make people look like idiots if they go along with it. So something that's interesting. But I want to get to the regulators in a second. But before I do, two things. Emily Kaplan was who I was trying to think of from Broken Science. Check out Broken Science. She does a wonderful job. You will love talking to her. And I want you to also know that if you go to the CDC websites, you will see a list of many, 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 many dozens of countries that if you are a asylum seeker and you come to this country, the CDC requires you to take ivermectin. And that was on the website through the COVID debacle. So, of course, I've used it a million times. But the regulators are really where I want to put my animus, which is that, do you know the opioid crisis happened because of exactly the same construct you're describing? Which is that some evangelists, some doctors that were just enthusiasts about opiates, who were probably getting money from the opiate company, but it doesn't really matter. What they got was control of the academic outlets, then got control of the regulators, then attorneys started taking advantage of things based on this shift in medical practice. So you could be sued, not malpractice, sued criminally for inadequate treatment of pain. And then all of a sudden, pain is the fifth vital sign. The VA picks that up. The California Medical Association picks that up. The insurance companies pick it up. The Department of Mental Health picks it up. And all of a sudden, if you are not making more of the pain scale than the pulse, you will lose your license, you will lose your hospital standing, and if you don't give your patients a giant bottle of opiates, even if they're a drug addict, when they leave the hospital, you have committed potentially a crime. And that was the same playbook with COVID, in my opinion.
Very, very much. It was top down. It was ubiquitous, and it was overwhelming to lots of doctors. In fact, when I first discovered that I was vaccine injured, I went to see my personal doctor, and she looked at me and she said, "Jimmy, I'm treating 5 people just like you. 3 of them are nurses and 2 of them are other doctors, and they're all afraid to talk about it." And
Of course.
I mean, how did we allow this? Of course, because capitalism, which is good and bad, and the bad part is that money rules everything. So now you find out. So then they would always have these. Well, the studies show that ivermectin doesn't work. Yeah, who funded that study? And then they would do it bad science. They would improperly conduct that study. They would hold off ivermectin until days after they were supposed to give it. They would give you too big of a dose or too low of a dose. They would rig the trials. That's not anything new.
Even if the trials were well done and the studies were reasonably well founded, interfering with a doctor's efforts to do the best thing on behalf of their patient is egregious. And I would argue, and I want you to pick this up, that we live in a time when every Galileo is being attacked by the Spanish Inquisition. That these people that are crushing anybody with a dissenting opinion have to understand they are the Spanish Inquisition. By the same token, you have to, people must look at their behavior right now, and especially during COVID. By the same token, if you were screaming at people to mask up, you would be the prison guards in 1938. You would be the prison guard. That's the behavior. That's the impulse, is to pick up the enthusiastic brainwashing of the moment and foist it on other people with aggressive intent. If you called the helpline that Tim Walsh set up, you would be a prison guard. You would not be somebody trying to kill Hitler. You would be a prison guard. And people don't understand that's what's happened to us.
Yes, well, especially with Tim Walsh, he was in. So I always was brought up, talked about the horrors of this old Soviet Union, not the current modern day Russia, but the old Soviet Union, which was this authoritarian, totalitarian system that encouraged people to snitch on each other, even inside your own family, if you did something that went against the regime. Well, that's exactly what Tim Walsh set up in Minnesota. That's exactly what was encouraged from coast to coast. And this idea that it's just, we're living in an upside down, backwards world. I live in California, where they actually passed a law that restricted doctors from practicing medicine. Politicians were going to dictate how you got to practice medicine, meaning they weren't allowed to treat COVID in any way except what the legislature said, which is that's not how medicine works. You're always allowed to prescribe medicines off-label for if it's approved for one thing, you can then try it and experiment with your patient on another thing that it's as long as it's approved. And so they took that away and said, not only did they take that away, they said if you did that, they're going to put you in jail. So that's what they did in freedom-loving California while Gavin Newsom was wagging his finger and calling DeSantis a fascist. Well, they were implementing fascism in California. People love fascism, right? So, well, all you have to do is scare people a little. And so you make people beg for authoritarian solutions. And that's what COVID was. They scared the hell out of everybody. And people were begging for mandated experimental medical treatments to be enforced on their neighbor. They were begging for the state to restrict people's ability to work and travel and movement if they didn't follow the authoritarians' rule. They did all these things that you would, and then they ostracized people. You should be. It brought out the worst in people, but that's exactly what fear does, and that's what's happening right now. Is I believe on a larger scale why we have. I've always been pro-immigration in my life, but what's happening in the Western world right now is to flood places with an overwhelming amount of migrants, and so it creates chaos. Chaos always favors the establishment, and then you'll have people begging for authoritarian. That's why they don't fix homelessness. That's why they don't fix the fentanyl problem. That's why they don't fix anything, and that's why they have open borders. That's why they're trying to pit poor workers against even poorer migrants. And so if we wake up to that, we could come together and we can oppose the oligarchy, because chaos always favors the establishment, and they want us begging for authoritarian rules. And it's clear to me that's the game. That was the game during COVID, and that's the game going forward. They keep doing this over and over, and they want us to keep turning on our neighbor. They want us to keep hating our neighbor and thinking our neighbor's the threat, our neighbor's the white supremacist, our neighbor's a Nazi, our neighbor's our enemy. Well, our neighbor isn't our enemy. Our neighbor is suffering under the same oligarchy that we're suffering under, and we have a common enemy. And if we come together and wake up to that fact, that is us. That's what's really that scares the establishment, and that's why they have to do censorship, and that's why they just banned Twitter or X in Brazil and Telegram and Rumble, and that's what the same thing they did to Julian Assange. They didn't put Julian Assange in prison because he was spreading misinformation and lies. You get in trouble for telling the truth. I tell people this all the time. That Tucker Carlson didn't get fired for lying. He got fired when he was lying, repeating the lies about the Iraq War. They gave him his own show on CNN, and then they gave him his own show on MSNBC, and then they gave him his own show on Fox. It was when he started to tell the truth about Ukraine, Russiagate, and then he told the truth and brought on Bobby Kennedy to tell the truth about COVID and vaccines. That was the last straw. So you don't get in trouble in this oligarchy for lying. You get promoted. Rachel Maddow did Russiagate for 7 straight years. She got a $30 million contract. That's $100,000 a day she gets paid for lying, and that's because she's doing the service and the bidding of the war machine. So I know I keep mixing things, but they actually do go together, and that's what censorship's all about. Because if they can't control the narrative, then they lose, and then they have to start disappearing people, and they'll do that too. But it's a lot harder for them. And let's remember where censorship started. It started with Alex Jones, some guy that they could make everybody hate. Very easy to hate. And I spoke out against that. Even though Alex Jones and I had a very contentious relationship, I knew that as goes Alex Jones, as goes me. And I wasn't, people go, why are you defending Alex Jones? I'm not defending Alex Jones. I'm defending the First Amendment and my right to use the First Amendment. If you can take it away from him, you can take it away from him. So they said, hey, we're just going to start with Alex Jones. And guess where it led to? Within a couple of years, it led to the leading journalists being censored, the leading doctors, the leading scientists, and finally the president of the United States got censored. So if they can do that to them, they can do it to anybody. And that's why you have to stand up against censorship in any form.
And as many people have said, that his historical record is filled with people that have done censoring, and it's never the good guys. And it's the playbook of every dictatorship and every totalitarian regime. It's not the playbook of democracy, though we've had some moments of weakness with the Alien and Sedition Act and things where we've gone off the rail a bit, but we've always found our way back. I'm wondering if I believe I saw you interviewing Mike Benz yesterday or day before, and I'm wondering if that put a finer point. Yeah, I wonder if that put a finer point, if you learned anything. He's always astonishing to talk to. Anything you took away from that interview that increased your sense of where this is coming from?
Well, I make the point on my show. I'll show this video over and over. When Donald Trump got elected, first of all, everybody loved Donald Trump up until he got elected. All right, I'm talking about the establishment, right? He was my whole life, my whole adult life. He was welcomed on every late night talk show. He guest hosted Saturday Night Live. Oprah said that they should run for president together. The women of The View said they loved him. I just posted a video of Stephen Colbert thanking him for running for president and how everybody loves Donald Trump. They gave him his own network television show for over 10 years, and Hollywood gave him Emmy nominations. They all golfed together. Their kids are all best friends. They all went to each other's third and fourth weddings. They loved him. They loved Donald Trump, right, until he became president. And why is that? Because the deep state, the blob, which is run by billionaires. So get back to my original point. When he started to talk out about the deep state and the blob, the CIA controlling things and the war machine and the military-industrial complex, Chuck Schumer went on Rachel Maddow's show and she said, boy, for a guy who says he's really smart, he's being really dumb to criticize the CIA. Because if you do that, they've got 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you. And so what he revealed at that moment was that the president doesn't control the CIA, that the CIA doesn't work for the president. So if they don't work for the president, who exactly do they work for? Well, that would be the question I would follow up with. And of course, Rachel Maddow, who works for the same people that the CIA work for, she didn't ask that question, but that's the obvious question to ask. And so that's the big problem with Donald Trump. And you don't have to like Donald Trump or not like Donald Trump, but you can realize that what they're doing to Donald Trump, they would do to anybody who they consider a rogue. They're doing it to Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a defense contractor. He's in bed with NASA, the military-industrial complex, but he's a rogue billionaire. He stepped out of line a little by allowing a little bit of free speech on Twitter, and they immediately demonize him as the worst thing, a right-wing Hitler type, just like what they did to Trump. And they're banning him, and Robert Reich wrote a column saying that they should throw him in jail. So that's a former Clinton advisor, a Clinton staff member, kept the Secretary of Labor. So and they all know better. They all know what they're doing. So they all work for the blob. And so what Mike Pence told me when he came on my show was that I asked him that question. So who do they work for? And he said, well, there's a thing called the National Endowment for Democracy, right? So these are after the Church Committee in the 70s, the CIA and the FBI couldn't do all the stuff that they were doing because it's illegal and it got exposed. So they needed to find out a way to do it. And so they created these CIA cutouts, USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy. And he told me, if you go to the webpage of the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Atlantic Council, and you look at who the people who are on the boards, it's all, Raytheon, McDonald's, all the biggest corporate, the oil companies, Exxon, those are the people, that's the people who run the blob, meaning the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, those are the people who run it. It's a handful of billionaires, it's a cabal, and they run the entire Western world. And so that's why we've invaded Iraq and Libya and Syria. Right now, as Kamala Harris is at the debate saying that she stands up for the international norms and rules of order and that you have to be able to have your own sovereignty. And she was referring to Ukraine, which is why we're supporting Ukraine against Russia. That's not why, because we are currently occupying a third of Syria, which is a country right next to Ukraine. And which third of that country do you think it is? It's the third of the country with oil. And that's another. So we don't care about the norms is we get to do what we want and everybody else has to take it. That's the norms. And the United States, we didn't pay a price for doing what we did to Libya. Libya, the most successful country in all of Africa. Gaddafi was loved by his people. Everybody had health care. Everybody had education. Everybody had housing. Everybody had a safe life. It was free of terrorism. And then he in fact created what they called the eighth wonder of the world, their water system. He turned deserts into farmland. He was a hugely popular leader. And we overthrew overthrew that leader. Why? Because he threatened the U.S. dollar. He was going to create a monetary system just for Africa that was going to compete with the euro and the U.S. dollar. And that's the way we control things. People don't understand. The United States dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that comes through the petrodollar. And the petrodollar is that we made a deal back in the 70s with Saudi Arabia that you could use our military anywhere you want, which they do in places like Yemen and places like Syria. But in exchange for that, you won't sell oil in any other denomination except the U.S. dollar. So what does that mean? That means every other country in the world who wants to buy oil has to convert their currency into U.S. dollars. So of all the countries in the world, keep U.S. dollars on hand. So they have a bunch of it. So that artificially props up the U.S. dollar and our economy, right? And so when Libya and Gaddafi wanted to create his own to compete, they couldn't have that because that's how we control. We put sanctions. And so, which is the worst thing you could do. That's called weaponizing the U.S. dollar, which builds resentment around the world against people. And so now they can't trade with each other, and that crushes other people's economy. And that's how we control the South America, Latin America, Africa, Europe. It's by our use and threat of sanctions. And we use them all the time. And so that's why Gaddafi was like, well, let's get rid of this. Let's start our own thing. And that's why they did what they did. They killed him and they overthrew his country, turned it into a failed state. Not only that, but that eighth wonder of the world, his water system, the United States bombed it with depleted uranium-tipped bombs, which then polluted all their water with nuclear waste. So we are the terrorists. Again, once and for all, I can't say this enough. The United States are the world's terrorists, not ISIS. It's not, by the way, we invented Al-Qaeda, and Hillary Clinton's on video admitting that. It's not the Al-Qaeda or ISIS or al-Nusra. It's the United States. And we're currently still doing it, right? We are the ones who initiated this war in Ukraine. If you know anything about it, we don't care about democracy. In fact, we want to make sure democracy doesn't happen. And so when democracy happened in Ukraine, we got together with the right-wing Nazis, the Azov Battalion, to overthrow the government because that government didn't want to go along with the United States and Europe. They wanted to be friendlier to Russia because they got a better economic deal from Russia, and we couldn't have that. And so that's why we're having the Ukraine war. And nobody knows that. They'll never tell you that on the news. And if you do tell people that, they think you're a conspiracy theorist. But everybody from Chomsky to Kissinger warned us from doing what we're doing in the Ukraine. And what they said, what was going to happen is going to put Russia and China closer together. And that's the last thing that the West wants. Well, that's exactly what's happened. And now there are finally economic power centers being formed because of our over-weaponization of the U.S. dollar. Things like BRICS, right? So that's another. So now they're going to start competing with the U.S. dollar. And if the U.S. dollar fail, when it's happening, it's going to happen. So when the U.S. dollar fails to be the reserve currency of the world, our economy will collapse.
And while many people aren't aware of this, they will not be able to watch this show on Spotify either. So evidently, this will be taken down in time, and they will not find out about Jimmy Dore's opinion on any of these matters, other than if they're watching the live stream right now. This is the review. Caleb, you want to help me with that?
Yeah, we for the people who didn't see the earlier part of the show, we received a warning, an enforcement actually from Spotify just a week ago that they took down, coincidentally, the last time that Jimmy Dore was on this show. It was down for about a week. It was taken off of the podcast platforms because we violated. They wouldn't actually tell us the rule. They wouldn't even tell us the episode they took down. I had to go and like demand answers before they would even tell us which episode. They just said one episode's taken down.
Everybody, retweet, repost. The Blob is after Jimmy because he's exposing more lies. I tell you, more lies, like Julian Assange. More lies Jimmy's espousing. That's why they're after him, because he's lying. That's always who they go after, is the liars, right, Jimmy? But we got to take a break, and when we come, go finish your thought. Then I have to take a break. I have to take a break first, then you can finish your thought. I also want to promote some of those comedy dates you've got behind you over your head when we come back. And Caleb, if you think about it, if you could pull that tape of Kamala Harris talking about the President Xi obfuscating the lab leak. We'll get to that. Mike Catherwood in here in a minute, and we'll be right back. I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins. And a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue. And we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. Many of us have not gotten over COVID. I'm not talking about the virus itself, but the response. We were flabbergasted about what the government could do to us. There is no telling what they might pull next time, and it's looking more like there will be a next time. So we all have to be what I call rationally ready. That's where the wellness company comes in. TWC is about access to physicians via telehealth, access to potentially life-saving medication. Years ago, having access to medication and telehealth might have seemed crazy, but now it seems crazy not to. Now, with claims that gain-of-function research have been done on the bird flu, I urge everyone to take control of their healthcare with the help of the wellness company. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off all their products, including the 4 medical kits, each of which has a different purpose. And we've added Tamiflu to one of them in case the bird flu does become a problem for humans. Be rationally ready. drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off.
Dr. Drew said the best way to quit drinking is by going cold turkey, and he's a doctor, so why would you question doctors?
Dr. Drew called me unfixable.
And of course, the TWC medical staff has also put some recommendations on about monkeypox, which is also treatable. And if it becomes widespread, they've been screwing with the virus. That's the only way that could happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to accept I could be wrong, but I just smell that if they're anticipating sort of pandemic levels of a virus that has never had that kind of transmissibility, how would that magically happen? How could they anticipate it unless they knew something about it? On top of that, what was the other thing I wanted to say about, the dengue fever has now broken out in the United States, in the Western United States. That is insane. That is wild, as well as in this region of the country, in the Southern California, we have West Nile, we have equine encephalitis. The mosquitoes are a profoundly serious source of infectious disease. You should know about that. Not that there was a monkeypox outbreak in Central Africa. You should not even be aware of that. The CDC should be aware of that. In the meantime, they're not telling you about the real threat to your health in your domain, in your local region, if you live in the Western United States. This is the insanity of what they've gotten into. So let me bring it back to something more sane, which is, of course, morning coffee, our caffeine, and our protein, and our chocolate. That's how Susan and I do it every day. We put Paleo Valley's grass-fed and finished chocolate bone broth in our coffee. High in collagen, low in calories, just 80 per scoop. Made, at least the chocolate's 80. I think the unflavored is less. I think it's like 60. Made from bones, not hides. Grass-fed finished beef means that the grass-fed beef, they're grass-fed their entire life. Paleo Valley's bone broth helps the battle against sarcopenia. It's a good source of protein and collagen. Sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass as we age. It's my active fight every day now. An integral part of my weight-bearing workout regimen. And it comes in, as I said, plain and vanilla as well. Make it part of your regimen today at drdrew.com/Paleo Valley. If you go to drdrew.com/Paleo Valley, you get 15% off your first order, or subscribes. You get the meat sticks and the bone broth, 20% off. If you go to drdrew.com/Paleo Valley. They are such a part of our life. Jimmy Dore in here. He got a few things we want to get into before I bring my Catherwood in here. Jimmy, before the break, you were trying to say something. I interrupted you. You were trying to comment to being a liar.
So, we were talking about, you said the blob is after me. Well, I was invited to speak on the anniversary of the Nord Stream pipeline bombing, right? Which was the essential to get energy from Russia to Germany. And now the United States blew it up. We know they did. Joe Biden said he would do it. So did Newland and everybody else. So I was invited to speak at the UN Security Council on the anniversary of that. And after I spoke on that, I did that from Italy. I was in Europe at the time. And on the plane ride home, my computer, all of a sudden it said, hey, a MacBook now has control of your iCloud account. And I was like, what?
Boy.
When I got off the plane, I called my IT guy, who's a former military guy. He was an officer, and his thing is the counterterrorism, and he's a tech specialist. And when I told him that, he went, "Oh, Jimmy, even I couldn't do that." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, this isn't a person doing that." He said, "This is obviously a state actor." And I said, "Why? How do you know that?" He said, "Because they're probably using something called Pegasus, which costs millions of dollars to get." And it was invented by the
Caleb's
Israelis.
interested now. He loves Pegasus.
Pegasus. That's expensive. That's state level people. Wow. For you to be targeted like that, that's huge.
So I said, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have given that speech at the UN Security Council." And he laughed. And I go, "No, I just did that." And he said, "Oh, that's what this is." And so I got home. I gave him my computer and my phones, and he confirmed that it was Pegasus. And then he got it off, but he's like, they can get back on anytime they want. That's how Pegasus works. You don't even have to click anything. You don't have to click a link or anything, or they can just, if they have your phone number, they're in. And so now they have any material from my entire life they have. They're certainly going to use it to compromise me when the time comes. And they'll do things like that. They'll take you down, take down my interview on Spotify. You know what's interesting is they just censored Candace Owens, and she went to Spotify. Isn't that interesting? So but now Spotify is notorious as YouTube. So the only place really to go right now is X, or you go to Rumble. So I'm going to enjoy Rumble as long as I can until Google decides to buy Rumble, which is what's going to happen. And I said that to the heads of Rumble. So what happens when they make an offer? And they said, we're going to resist. I'm like, nobody's going to, everybody has a price, right? Woody Allen did a movie about it. Everybody. So if they come in to give you $1 trillion, you're going to take it. And that, of course they will. And if that's what it takes, that's what it will, because the government will just print it, give it to Google. Google's a CIA cutout. It was invented by the CIA. And so that's how this all works. Okay. And so I got to stop saying CIA, or else they're going to keep taking down our interviews. But anyway,
they'll take down this one.
You don't live in a democracy. Your democracy was stolen from you decades and decades. This idea that democracy is on the ballot. Isn't it interesting that the party that's saying democracy is on the ballot just made Kamala Harris their nominee without zero? I like to call her a queen, and you can't take down a queen. And by a queen, I mean a monarch installed by elites without any votes from the people. And that's so the party telling you they're putting democracy on the ballot just took all the ballots, the 14 million ballots of the Democratic primary, and they threw them out the window. They got rid of those ballots. And they just had donors, billionaires, the blob, install Kamala Harris. She was their first choice in 2020, by the way. Do you remember this? So she was at a Martha's Vineyard fundraiser. She met all the blob, all the big donors, and they anointed Kamala Harris. And then she went into the primary and she couldn't get a vote. She had to drop out before Iowa. The blob still wanted her, so they forced her on Joe Biden and made Joe Biden choose her as his vice president. So they could do exactly what they just did. They could get rid of Joe Biden and install Kamala Harris. That's exactly how this game works. And you don't live in this idea that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a speed bump to the blob, and that just like Elon Musk. And you don't have to like either of those guys, but everybody loved both of those guys until they wanted to do a little free speech, or they didn't want to do as much war as the blob wanted. Remember how much people loved Elon Musk? He was making electric cars. He was on climate change, the whole thing. And then all of a sudden he wants to do a little free speech, and guys giving you free speech has now turned into Hitler and a right winger and all that stuff. So anyway, just keep I want people to focus on Bobby Kennedy giving a speech at a Trump rally at a stadium, talking about traditional democratic values, and the entire stadium cheering. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. It matters that that's where the country is, and they don't want you to know that. We all share the same goals and the same values, but they want us to split us apart so they can control us and install a leader like Kamala Harris, and we're just going to take it. In fact, people are going to cheer it on.
Yeah, watch any videos that Bobby Kennedy has put out or Nicole Shanahan. They are just so inspiring. Nobody can be other than enthused about what they have put out. Couple things. I'm going to bring Mike Catherwood in just a second, but tell me about the comedy dates behind you.
Oh, so we're doing a show called Rumble Time, which is, our homage to free speech. It's like our Bill Maher show, but it's actually on point, and it doesn't repeat CIA talking points. So that's what we're doing. It's called Rumble Time, and we have celebrity guests. We had our first one was in Chicago in front of a live theater at the Ramova. There were 700 people. We had Alex Jones as our guest. This next one, I think Rob Schneider is going to be our guest. We're going to have people like, hopefully, people like Tucker Carlson, people like you, and hopefully people like that as guests on the show. And it's our version of Bill Maher. It's actually funny, and it's actually on point, and we don't repeat establishment talking points. We actually poke holes in the establishment talk. So our next one is at Two Roads Theater here in Studio City on September 27th, and then I'll be doing stand-up in Tempe, Arizona, and then in Burbank, California. So go to jimmydore.com for a list for those dates. We're adding new dates every day.
Great. Mike Catherwood is my former co-host on Loveline. It's a pleasure to bring him back in here with us. He wanted to get some questions into Jimmy as well. We got to put your mic on, Mike.
Oh, yes, hello.
And we got to get the cameras going so we can see your beautiful face. There you are. What's that, Jimmy?
Can I do one plug for my friend Nellie McKay, who's one of my all-time favorite musicians? She had one of my favorite albums. But anyway, she's going to be in LaGrange, Texas tomorrow night. Go to NellieMcKay.com and check her out. If you do, you'll love her. She has a new song about Kamala Harris, which is it's hilarious. She's funny. She's unbelievably talented, and she had one of the top, I think it was People Magazine chose one of her albums as the top 20 albums of the decade. So anyway, go check her out tomorrow night in LaGrange.
Absolutely. And then, Michael, because you don't have X, where should people find you?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, Instagram for sure. At Mike Catherwood.
Okay. And the podcast is Mikey Likes You.
Mikey Likes You is the podcast.
All right.
And I'm a massive Jimmy Dore fan. So
right. I saw you listening carefully. He was actually applauding you along the way. Like he was making too much noise. He was so enthused by you. Because I know he wants to ask you some questions. So have at it, Mike.
Well, I mean, not as much as I would like to say. I have a really weird perspective on this stuff. Because I'm like in a lab. If you make a coastal elite, I work in the entertainment industry. I'm born and raised here in Los Angeles, and now I live in rural Texas, and I own a farm. And not only on top of that, I trained at a jiu-jitsu academy, who's owned by Tim Kennedy. And for those of you who don't know, he's a Green Beret who transitioned into being a UFC fighter, and then now is a kind of a political pundit. So I'm surrounded by almost cartoonishly right-wing. My friends are law enforcement, fire, military, construction workers, and farmers in rural Texas. And I think the narrative that gets pushed along is that a lot of these traditional right-wing people, that they love Trump and that they're kind of hypnotized by Donald Trump. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. They're going to vote for Trump. They support Trump. They don't like him as much as anybody else does. They just can't fathom the alternative.
Mike, before Jimmy answers that, I just want to say that Joel Pollack yesterday framed it in a very sort of colorful way. He said, it's like the theme of every Western movie. The guy in the black hat comes to town, the bad guy, but he starts cleaning up the corruption and the really bad guys who were in the town presenting themselves as the elite and the good guys, right. But it's the bad guy who cleans everything up. I'm going to give Jimmy respond to can you hear us okay, Jimmy?
Oh, yeah.
That's for you. Yeah. Well, it was for you to respond to Mike. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just tweeted this out today. I tweeted out that video of Stephen Colbert slobbering over Donald Trump, and I have videos of The View doing the same thing. I have videos of every late night talk show doing that. I have Oprah doing that with Donald Trump. So again, and so they loved him up until the point where he wouldn't do exactly what the blob and the military-industrial complex wanted him to do, and he wouldn't. And he wanted to close the border, which they don't want. They want a wide open border for many reasons. One of them is suppresses wages in a tight labor market. And Bernie Sanders used to complain about this in 2015. Bernie Sanders is saying open borders, that's a Koch brothers thing. They want to do that. They want to bring in cheap labor to undermine the union workers. That's exactly true. All right. But another thing is now they're doing it at such a high level, they want to create chaos here in the United States. So we beg for authoritarian rules and 15-minute cities and digital banking and all that stuff. It's all bad. And so they had to then take Donald Trump, this beloved billionaire real estate game show host, and turn him into a Hitler/Stalin to keep you voting for their hand-chosen military-industrial complex tools like Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and now Kamala Harris. That's what this is all about. They had to, and again, I think Donald Trump is. I said this on someone else's show. Chris Hedges. I was just talking with him, and we were trying to figure out why Donald Trump didn't. He was the only president in recent history that didn't start a war. And why is that? And my only conclusion is that I've heard from people who are close to him said he can't stand to make those phone calls to the Gold Star families and tell them that their kids are dead. He can't do that. So what I told Chris Hedges was that I think Donald Trump is corrupt, but he's like New York real estate corrupt. He's not military industrial complex, CIA corrupt. Those are two different levels. These guys are doing mass murder for political gain. He's fudging the numbers on how much his property's worth for political gain and maybe screwing over some workers. That's a total different type of evil than Dick Cheney level evil. And so that you're right. So you get a choice between it's a lesser of two evils. But as Glenn Ford from the Black Agenda report said, the Democrats are able to implement a much greater evil. And I've always explained this to people about how it all started with Bill Clinton. So Ronald Reagan became president and he wiped out the Democrats, right? And so the Democrats got scared. And it was one of those cases of if you can't beat them, join them. So George Herbert Walker Bush wanted to do NAFTA. You remember that? So, and he couldn't get it passed. George Herbert I couldn't get NAFTA passed. Bill Clinton runs as a Democrat. He comes in, he gives cover to the Blue Dog Democrats who stood up against NAFTA because they had to support the unions, and they voted for NAFTA, which took the legs out from underneath unions for over a generation because Bill Clinton gave him cover. So my point is that Bill Clinton was able to do things that the Republicans weren't. NAFTA was the first thing. He then went on to gut welfare as he exploded the prison population, and then he also deregulated Wall Street, which crashed our economy within 10 years. And then he had a secret deal with Newt Gingrich to privatize Social Security. These are all things that Republicans could never do, and Bill Clinton did that. And how do I know? Because Bill Clinton, when he became president, he called Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, and he said, hey, we're open for business. They started a thing, him and Al Gore, called the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC. Who was on that board? The Koch brothers were on the board of the DLC. So now with Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, the transformation of the Democratic Party into the party of Dick Cheney and George Bush is 100% complete. And that's why you have people like Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard defecting, and people like Elon Musk, who was a Democrat all his life, all that stuff. And, Trump was a Democrat. He had to run as a Republican because they don't have super delegates. And I told Bobby Kennedy when he came on my first show, when he first announced his run for presidency, I was laughing at him. I go, it's adorable. You think they're going to allow you to get the nomination. That's why they have super delegates, Bobby. That's never going to happen. They're never going to allow you to become. And he was like, no, the Democrats are better than the Republicans. He was all saying that stuff back then. And I was like, well, you're going to find out pretty soon. I was literally laughing at him. And he did it. And then within a couple of months, he dropped out of it. They did so much rigging of their primaries that he had to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. That's a Kennedy. and the guy who was a Democrat, he endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016. I mean, that's how much of a Kennedy he is. All right, so and it's how much of a Democrat. So that's why you now we're always left with the lesser of two evil. But now this time, as the Black Agenda report says, the lesser of two evil is not the Democrats. They're actually able to. So here's one more example I'll give you. When Barack Obama got elected, we thought it was going to be this big liberal, progressive lefty because he was a black guy and he spoke beautifully. Of course, what he did was he wasn't an end to George Bush's policies. It was a continuation. He took us from 2 wars to 7.
Enhancement.
He bailed out the banks while he kicked out 5.1 million families out of their houses, not families, not people, 5.1 million families out of their houses while he made sure the bankers got their bonuses. He implemented a right-wing healthcare plan. That wasn't a left-wing healthcare plan. That was from the Heritage Foundation. The same people who did Agenda 2025, they wrote his healthcare plan that we're living with today, which was a giveaway to big pharma and big insurance. And you know how I know? Because the day after that healthcare plan, Obamacare, was passed, the stocks of health insurance companies and big pharma went through the roof. And that's how you know it was a giveaway to that. So, and Barack Obama repealed habeas corpus, right? Which was in the Magna Carta. Habeas corpus means you get to have a speedy trial and they have to tell you what you're charged with. So why would he repeal that? Because that's another way to control people, not just censorship. But if they can say you're a terrorist, which is what they're saying now. So if you say they can now throw you in jail, indefinite detention without giving you a trial. That's why he repealed the habeas corpus. He did that in 2011 in the NDAA Act, Section 1021. And the reason why they did that, so they can control people. They can't have you having a voice. And now if he accuse you of being spreading misinformation on the internet, you're now considered a cyber terrorist. And all they have to do is say you're a terrorist and they can take all your rights away. So now we're operating, the habeas corpus was in the Magna Carta. So now we're operating on a liberty from somewhere around the 1100s. They repealed the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
That people, and this doesn't.
King John.
And let me just tell you, Barack Obama went on to drop more bombs than George Bush. And because he was a Democrat, nobody noticed. And the military-industrial complex would much rather have a Democrat person of color doing their imperialism than having a guy like Donald Trump, who they've already branded a racist, to get rid of him because he puts an ugly face on imperialism and it makes it harder for them to do. In fact, he tells the truth about it. They asked him, why are you leaving the troops in Syria? And he's such a political novice. He said, for the oil. They're like, you don't say that. It's liberty and freedom. No, it's our oil and we're taking it. He said the same thing about Venezuela, that they wanted to invade Venezuela and take it. We could have had all that oil. Trump just says the quiet part out loud. And the entire world saw the president of the United States give away the game of the Americans' foreign policy over the last 60 years, which was to invade smaller, weaker countries and steal their natural resources and do it under the guise of liberty. We were saving the people from Gaddafi's oppression. No, we were there to make sure we could steal all their stuff. And by the way, Gaddafi thought what was going to keep him safe was that he was the firewall between immigrants from Africa to the West. And turns out that was the exact reason. Another reason why they killed him was because they wanted to get rid of that firewall and flood Western Europe with immigrants. So what's going on now is lesser of two evil. Look what the Black Agenda report said. Don't be duped. They have to turn people into white supremacists, Nazi, Hitler, Stalins, so they can keep you voting. The deep state's not trying to kill Joe Biden. In fact, the CIA lied for Joe Biden. They said Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. 50 CIA former heads, right? And now they're trying to kill Donald Trump. They're not trying to kill Kamala Harris and Dick Cheney. So just keep those things. So that's my sliver of hope, is that because they're trying to kill Donald Trump and they're trying to throw Elon Musk in jail, there's a sliver of hope. And that's the only thing. I got to have something or else I'll be depressed.
Today is my guest is a misinformation terrorist, Jimmy Dore. Hitler, Nazi, Stalin, Jimmy Dore. Who brings us hope. Did you guys see the Rogan guest this week who felt that he was going to be killed by the blob? Did you see that guy? What did you think of that?
I mean, it's one of those things where I have a hard time making heads or tails of it. I mean, it's so far outside of my
I wanted to say, I'm wondering if Jimmy would know. Did you see that, Jimmy?
So yes, I had that guy on my show this week.
Epstein.
I've had him Epstein. I've had him on my show before, And so he's this kind of borderline, artistic, narcissistic personality disorder, a Harvard professor who stumbled onto some data. And what he stumbled onto was that Google is rigging their algorithms to favor the Democratic nominee. This time it's, I think it was Gizmodo or somebody found this out in 2016 and they immediately had to silence them. But he found this out and he's onto it. And he has somehow technically figured out data-wise that Google is able to swing your vote. He goes, it's not people like me or you, people who know the game. It's the independents, the undecided. So what they'll do with the algorithm is if you try to go to a news story and you put in some keywords, it'll send you to an article that's favorable to Kamala Harris and the Democrats. What they do is they send reminders to vote. Who do they send it to? They send it to Democrats way more than they send it to Republicans. That's another way they swing the vote. And so he has figured out mathematically that Google can swing as many as 6 to 25 million votes, which would mean it's impossible for Donald Trump to become president. Now, the interesting thing about that guy is he came on my show lamenting about because he stumbled onto this data. He's a Democrat. He's a liberal. He considers himself a lib. And he refers to Republicans as right-wing nut jobs, right? And he said, but my family thinks I'm a Trump supporter because I've stumbled onto this data and because I'm exposing, because of my work. My family, my friends, they're all calling me Trumpers. And then I explained to him why Google is doing that, which is what I just explained to you, is because Donald Trump thinks that the president should control the military and the CIA. And the president hasn't controlled the military and the CIA since they killed Kennedy. And that's so they disabused him of that idea. That's why they did Russiagate. That's why they did January 6th. By the way, did you know they did January 6th also in Brazil? Do you know about that? So there was this guy Lula. Lula was running for president, and
that.
He was way too far. This is the two elections ago, and he was way too far left for the establishment. So they put him in jail. Lula was in jail, and they thought the center right guy in Brazil. But the far right guy, Bolsonaro, won. They didn't see that coming, just like they didn't see Trump coming. So he's like the Trump of Brazil. So they're like, oh, what do we do? So they had to let Lula back out of prison because he's the only one who could beat Bolsonaro at the ballot box. Lula beats Bolsonaro. They immediately do their own version of January 6th, where they had people storm the Capitol and everything. So then they made it illegal for Bolsonaro and his political following to ever run for president again. That's the same thing they did here. So if you saw the Christopher Wray, who was the head of the FBI, was in front of Congress, and there was a congressman, I forget his name. He said, "Did you have FBI assets dressed up as MAGA supporters inside the Capitol before the riot started?" And the FBI had said, "I can't answer that question." Well, that means it's yes. So what does that tell you? That tells you this was the FBI instigated, just like the pipe bomb thing was. And I think it was Mike Benz and Tucker Carlson revealed that video. They knew about this anyway. So this was another FBI. It was the exact. And now we have undercover FBI undercover video that I just showed on my show yesterday with Mike Benz of Nancy Pelosi saying, yes, they've stormed the Capitol. They're trespassing on federal land. This is what we've been waiting for. That's on video. And so that's exactly what they wanted, so they could make it illegal for Donald Trump to run again, because they know populism is popular. And they would have done the same thing. And again, you don't have to like Donald Trump to know that if they're going to do it to Donald Trump, they'll do it to Bernie Sanders, they'll do it to Jill Stein, they'll do it to Cornel West, they'll do it to anybody who isn't controlled by the blob. That's why everybody should worry about this. Unfortunately, Bernie Sanders is a cuck, and he can't wait to roll over for the establishment. They even Russiagated him, and then he went and Russiagated himself. I don't know if you know that. So that's what a big of a failure Bernie Sanders turned out to be. And now Bernie Sanders went from being against the establishment and trying to expose the billionaire class controlling everything to doing their bidding. He's doing their bidding for him. And now he's joined hands with Dick Cheney to endorse Kamala Harris, who was handpicked by nobody except billionaires that control the blob. Not one vote for Kamala Harris. Well, most unpopular vice president in the history of our country. Now all of a sudden she's neck and neck with Donald Trump. And I don't believe that we're going to have a fair election, but I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that.
Well, we're not allowed to talk about pretty much everything you've been talking about today, so we'll see. So we'll see how that goes. And I think you got to get the word out about Pegasus. So if something weird does come out about you, people understand where it came from. That they've been monitoring it inside the workings of all your private instruments. But listen, Jimmy, I want to let you go. I got to talk to Mike a little bit. It's always great to talk to you. I always feel like I've been exposed to an encyclopedic fund of knowledge. Susan, are you leaning into the mic there? Do I see that?
Yes, I was going to say if we get censored on YouTube, head over to Rumble or X because we'll still be there. Maybe
Hopefully.
Facebook. We don't know about Facebook.
We'll test the limits of all this, but
We're everywhere.
We'll see how good Pegasus is.
right.
We're making sure that we can't erase this.
But Jimmy, tell them again where they can find you, where you want them to go.
Well, we should go to dinner sometime. Where do you live, in Pasadena?
Pasadena, let's do it.
I know. Why are you not here in studio?
I live in
think he's
Studio
local.
City.
You live in like
I live
Studio
in-
City. Yeah, so you're right here.
You should be here.
You can
I
meet in the
came
middle.
from
I go to
Texas, and I'm here.
I go to this
Firefly.
place.
Let's go to Firefly.
Okay, Firefly sounds good. How about Bourbon Steak? You ever go there in Glendale? It's fantastic.
No,
That sounds good.
let's do it. We'll
Let's
do
go,
it.
bro.
All right, done and done.
Okay, all right. We'll get
All right,
together.
so-
Thanks for having me on. It's always great to talk with you.
All right, Jimmy, you
Come
got
in
it.
studio next time.
Thank you so
okay?
much.
I would
We'll
like-
at dinner.
I would
We'll
love
talk
to.
about that. Jimmy.
My mother-in-law lives.
Oh, he wants to come in studio.
My mother-in-law lives in Pasadena.
Oh, well,
I'll
good.
One, I could go to your studio and go
Well-
see her.
Who knew?
Excellent. Well, you've now set it up, so it's that will happen now. Susan will be sure of it, and we'll have dinner also. I don't know which is going to be first, but I think dinner will probably happen first, but we'll see.
How can you go to Glendale and have dinner and not go to an Armenian place?
I know.
Go to the
I'm not-
carousel.
you're not
Carousel,
allowed.
right?
You're not allowed.
No,
You gotta
I've heard good things about that steak place.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember
good
the
steak,
name
bro.
of it.
Good
so.
steak, bro.
So Michael grew up here in Pasadena, so he's had some exposure to our Glendale compatriots. And I spoke to Alex Balikian yesterday. You're shocked to know he's Armenian, who's running for Schiff's office, and he seems like a great guy.
It's weird how that. It's funny you brought that up because not Armenian. I know I could pass. I have passed before.
Michael did a famous spoof video about Armenians that got him in a lot of trouble.
Brow down. One of the greatest early YouTube videos ever. And I didn't put it up or monetize it. It just millions and millions of people reposted it, and it always get taken down. And the comments were so freaking funny. But I because I grew up here on the east side, I had a lot of Armenian friends growing up, right? And because of where I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley here, I had an extraordinary high level of Asian friends. And it's weird how almost like they're family members, right? Oddly protective I get over people who I don't even represent, right? When I hear people say derogatory stuff about Armenian people, Chinese people, Korean people, I go, hey, bro, pump your brakes. And more so than I do about people who when people say derogatory things about ethnicities I actually represent.
Right.
It's very strange. Like I almost got a fist fight, and I'm not that guy, over people making fun of Jeremy Lin. Remember the basketball NBA star?
Oh, yeah.
About 5-10 years.
Yeah.
He exploded in popularity. He was playing for the Knicks at the time. And I was just overhearing people just saying nothing to do with basketball, just the most horrific stuff.
Yeah.
And the New York Post put on the cover of the New York Post a chink in the armor when and I was like, wait, what are we doing here? How is this? You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, there are several populations of Americans that get discriminated against more than anybody, and no one defends them.
well, let's be clear. And maybe it's uncomfortable to say. Chinese, to an extent, Korean, and of course Jews are by and large so successful. People feel like it's okay. They do so well in
It's
life,
not punching down.
regardless of the insane level of burden, resistance, and oppression they may have experienced historically. They are so successful by and large in life that people go like, well, what is it? You know?
Yeah.
It's another thing too. Is like as radio people, you and I.
Yeah.
What Jimmy was saying, like if they can do it to this person, what do you think they're going to do to you? If they do it to Elon, what do they? About 7 years ago, Howard Stern was in a big litigation with SiriusXM because he was promised certain things with the acquisition of XM. And if Howard did this in his contract, he would get a certain amount of money. And he ended up losing the case. And it infuriated me because every other radio idiot that I would listen to would go, yeah, but he's rich already. He doesn't need the money. I go, that's not what matters. Don't you think that if these corporations can push around Howard Stern, what are they going to do to me? What are they going to do to Johnny Nobody on an AM station in Des Moines? Like it represents something a lot larger than just the amount of money that you have, you know?
Michael, explain who you are, where they can find you, and who Rudy is, because that's all in the streams.
In the world. I probably obvious. I'm a radio and television personality who's not on radio or TV at the moment. So there you go.
But Mikey Likes You podcast.
I do a podcast called Mikey Likes You, which is a health-based show. That is the one thing that I do know a lot about and I'm confident to dig my heels in. As Jimmy was talking, I'm very interested, but I can't sit there and even say yes or no to anything. One thing I can do is sit here and say the world of health is so insanely bass-ackwards, mostly due to the internet and mostly due to health professionals who are gaming it and capitalizing it monetarily by saying stuff that everyone collectively knows is not true. It's just kind of hyperbolic. And it makes me mad. A very funny cultural aspect of it, too, is just 10 years ago, by and large, left-leaning people were health conscious. And you
and I on the radio at Loveline we were fighting off the right back on when we did Loveline. It was the right that was telling us what we can and can't say. Now it's the left. It's so weird.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
But it was left-leaning people, you know, entertainers and tech people and young college people. They were health conscious and into it and training and looking. Now could not be more the opposite. If you are mildly interested in really interested in health, like where you're going to actually put in the time and effort to take care of yourself, training, nutrition, it's almost always these kind of like anti-vax MAGA people, and then the college age techie people are all like fat piles of crap,
and get angry with you
for even mentioning how dare you. And I go, what do you mean how dare you? How dare you tell me I need to get? No, I'm good. I don't need a vaccine. I'm good. And if I get COVID, I'll be fine. Trust me.
But they get. I've not had this experience. So tell me more about this. They get mad at you for advocating diet and exercise.
Yes,
that's the weirdest thing in the world to me.
Pointing, and I go, this has nothing to do. I want you to understand this. You are no less of a human. This doesn't make any impact. This has no bearing on your character. But you're a female who's 26 and you're 240 pounds. And you're talking about the medications you need to take care of the A1C and your blood sugar and the heart. And I go, how about don't be 240 pounds? This has nothing to do with it. This is not an insult. And you can take all you want and take into consideration genetic factors. You could look at environmental issues. You can look at stress levels. Sure, these things make a difference. Nothing is more predictive of your overall health than the amount of adipose tissue you carry on your body. The end.
I am concerned about Ozempic. Are you concerned about it?
Yeah. I do. I think there's a lot of on both directions, though. There's a lot of wild misinformation because it makes for good memes and good Instagram posts where it's like, oh, 70% of your muscle mass will be torched. And I go like, wait, no, hold on. One thing I do think, and this is purely from a human standpoint, because I'm not wise enough with the actual metabolic or internal chemical factors of Ozempic. I don't know that much about it. What I do know is this. For far too many things, including pain, including stress, including things not going your way in life, and obviously now including obesity, our immediate source of solution is pharmaceutical. And it just simply can't be the case. And if I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit more serious and provide a little bit more clarity to my argument, I've buried 25 people, loved ones, family and friends. And no one smokes more meth and crack than I used to smoke.
Right.
No one.
So Mike's a recovering drug addict. Yeah.
No one drinks more alcohol. That you physically can't get more alcohol into a body and still be alive.
Yeah, which you almost crossed over multiple times.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying this like for comedic effect I'm saying that no one knows punishing yourself with narcotics and alcohol more than I do. And all of these 24 people that I'm mentioning They all died from pharmaceutical pills. Pharmaceutical pills that were designed for people who had stomach cancers and got shot in the belly in Afghanistan.
You're talking about painkillers.
Extreme levels of unimaginable pain. If you have pancreatic cancer and you're in your last stages, this is what we're going to give you to make sure that you can just get through the day.
Right.
And you're a 25-year-old relatively healthy person popping them like for fun.
Oh, listen, and remember, they got going with that because the medical establishment said, you just take whatever you say. Pain is whatever you say it is. Pain control is whatever you say it is. They killed so many people with that. So many.
And I remember,
and now we're handing it out on the streets.
I remember one day I was bitching and moaning about it. And this is before fentanyl. This was Percocet era, 2010, 2012. We're on Loveline and we're just BSing, you and I. And you said, well, the American Medical Association doesn't have any doctors on it. And I thought you were making a joke. And I go, what do you mean? You're like,
lobby group. They do, but it's inside. They're a lobby group.
Right, but down the line, people who are actually calling the X's and O's in the American Medical Association, they're bureaucrats. They're financial people.
Sure.
But
they also have no relationship with doctors. We pay them to be a lobby group to try to get us protected, but they've done such a shitty job for so many decades. Most doctors don't even belong to it.
But what do actual MDs pay them in comparison to what Pfizer pays them, in comparison to what Merck pays them?
Who knows?
You know?
Yeah.
And the reason it bothers me so much is because the more and more it happens, the more and more it just becomes normalized. And
well, you heard Jimmy talking about it. He sort of had it framed right, which is the regulators and the establishment that gets control of these things because of evangelizing physicians on behalf of pharmaceuticals. That's how it goes off the rail.
Let me just a quick story, and I've told you this before, and you always like me to tell this story because I think it's a potent one. In recovery, as a drug addict, as an alcoholic, I've been in the rooms, right, doing actively trying to push myself to stay clean and to build my life without drugs and alcohol. And every once in a while, I would come around these guys in meetings or in certain facilities, and I'd say, I really don't want to spend much time with that fella. And then every once in a while, I come around these people, I said, this guy helps me by his mere behavior, by the way he handles himself with such dignity and honesty, and he's so giving and loving. I want to be around him, and I want to model myself after him. And the number one guy who did that was DJ AM. He was my number one. And he's fucking dead, not because he decided to fall off the wagon and go and hit up alleyways to get some dope.
Yeah.
Because doctors killed him.
Yeah. 100%.
It really drives me crazy.
Me too. He was somebody I went to for sponsorship for my patients all the time. So let's kind of wrap us up. We got to head towards the exit pretty soon here. There's been talk about us bringing Loveline back, and I've noticed whenever that conversation happens, people usually are talking about bringing back the period of history when we were doing Loveline, not necessarily just bringing back Loveline.
I agree, but also...
Well, certainly when they talk about Corolla and I, then they're like, I want the 90s back.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. To bring back, and by the way, as a host of Loveline, I want the Corolla era of Loveline to come back. And that's what I grew up listening to you and Adam.
Yeah.
I not to sound cheesy, but I literally modeled a lot of and wanted to get into broadcasting because of Adam. He was so smart, but not pretentious about it. And he's so clever and funny and quick-witted. He's one of the best of the best. But when I see people, because I literally can't put up anything on my Instagram. It could be me doing deadlifts and people are like, dude, bring Loveline back. I'm like, dude. And the more and more I think about it, it is true that it would be, there's no better time than now to do it because it would be obviously internet-based. We wouldn't have any restrictions on what we could and couldn't say. And sure, from a comedic standpoint, it was all, no one ever limited what you and I were doing. Right. What bothered me and drove me literally, I almost went to jail because there was a radio consultant who knew nothing about nothing except for making marketable radio, right? Just selling it to syndicators and to advertisers. And he said to me with a very serious look, no sense of irony, you can't talk about drugs so much with the callers. We can't talk about addiction and drugs. It's a little too dark. It's too dark. It's not good. And I was this close from putting his geriatric ass into a grave. I was like, What?
Mike, don't feel bad. The number one direction that Adam got during the entire run of his time on Loveline was, Adam, shut up. That was the numero uno. Adam, you're talking too much. Adam, just don't talk.
Adam, make room for the stoner stoner friggin' ska musician or rapper that's on as a guest who has nothing to say. You shut up, Corolla, so you can make room for the guy who plays bass in the Squirrel Nut Zippers to say shit, to say nothing.
Squirrel Nut Zippers. Oh my God, that's a good reference.
We tried to revise the Loveline with Dr. Drew After Dark. They worked very hard and they did a great production and it was pretty good. I mean, but it is a different era and I think it's just a lot harder also to sell advertisement. So
no, it is. But Drew and I were talking about this, and here, this is a note to you people in the industry of broadcasting. We were talking about it before we got on the air. There's only one type of person who makes a living in radio nowadays. One. There's one person, man or woman, broadcaster, old or young, and that is the person who simulcasts their podcast onto the radio.
Other than Howard Stern.
Does he? I mean, I don't get me wrong. He makes money because he signed a huge contract.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's ever been less of a
following
push to listen to Howard Stern than right now.
I agree.
And it includes any point in his terrestrial career. And I worship at the altar. He's the greatest radio broadcaster. Say what you want about the guy or what he's become and woke this. I don't care. He's the greatest radio broadcaster, bar none, ever. And I still bow at the altar of him.
Agreed.
But I have zero. I have Sirius in my rental car. I don't have Sirius in my cars at home.
I have Sirius.
And I just have zero feeling instinct to turn to Howard 101 right now.
We actually sold to Sirius too. But the thing is there is a couple of women that have a show and they're getting paid a huge amount of money, a sex show.
Oh yeah, that what the hell is that
Girls
show called?
Next Door. Not Girls. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're kind of hot too.
Yeah. But it is also
Barstool over at Barstool.
I think it is Barstool, and it is a digital show. It just happens to go on the radio also, and so Michael's point is still valid, which is that you can't do anything without a digital content.
30 million a year or something.
Something crazy.
But my point is like Linkin Park just got their first new vocalist to replace God bless his soul, Chester Bennington, who passed away. We could have Mike Shinoda on the show tonight.
Sure.
And talk about that and have him on Loveline, have him answering calls. No, like my point is like you're shooting fish in a barrel, and it's crazy because it could be a show, and there's no other show. I'm sure these young ladies are very good. There's no other show who has an active drug addict. Sorry, not active, but someone who's actively in recovery from serious drug addiction and alcoholism, who had sex with all of Southern California before he got married. And then also now is in a very stable, I think, loving marriage. I have perspective on it.
Yeah.
And a board certified addiction medicine specialist who is a real MD, not like a chiropractor who says, I'm a doctor. This is a doctor. It's different. You could say, well, there's plenty of advice shows. Eat me. There's nothing like it.
So a couple things. First of all, that x.com / Mike Catherwood is not Mike's X.
Hopefully soon it will be. It was.
But you should look for him on Instagram, right? Which is
at Mike Catherwood.
At Mike Catherwood.
Yes.
Same thing that was out there. We took it down very quickly. And if people are interested in going further with what you're suggesting, which is us doing something somewhere, where should they go? Where can they reach you?
At Mike Catherwood is always the best place to reach me.
So DM you on Instagram.
Yeah, DM me on Instagram, and then of course I have like the professional channels to go through. But more of it is just come. And nowadays, one of the benefits I think of this kind of industry-driven media is that the best way to get in touch with me is just get in touch with me. Like it's a groundswell grassroots effort by both the purveyors of media and also the people who are listening to it.
And people ask, some people who are not familiar with our show asked who the women's voice was. There she is there, Susan Pinsky, my wife, and she has a show this afternoon. Tell us about it.
I do. I'm having another episode of Calling Out with Susan Pinsky at 3 p.m. Pacific.
There you are.
6 p.m. Eastern. And Psychic Rebel Colby's coming in to meet Zach Voorhees, who's been a guest on this show. And we're taking some special guest callers from our fan base too. So sorry, I don't have my makeup and hair done
And
yet.
Zach is a Google
Do I look
whistleblower.
scary?
No, you look fine. Just the lighting was the lighting was off. I think
I have a
that's
story
why.
to tell you regarding Susan, by the way. It's a quick one.
All right.
So I'm seeing my friend, he's an MD, a literal doctor, and he's going through divorce. And we're talking. And I know him outside of the doctor's office. And we're talking, and he said, Dr. Drew this, Dr. Drew that. And I said, yeah, Dr. Drew this, Dr. Drew that. And I said, yeah, but he's been married a long time. He and Susan have been together a long time. And this gentleman's going through divorce, and he's a doctor. He's like, man, I don't know how you do it. Because, you know, keeping things going in the doctor's office and maintaining the marriage, it just seemed impossible to me. What do you think his secrets are? And I said, you want to know how?
No, don't say it.
You wanna know
Mike,
how easy
don't
is
do
for
it.
Drew to stay married for a long time and be happy? I'd go, have a wife that looks like Susan.
Oh, there you go. That's a good one.
1,000,000% what I said.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Thank you.
You win.
And he says, he's like, seriously? I was like, yes. I was like, I mean, I definitely think, of course, you guys work at your marriage. It has to help.
Oh,
Like
thank
year
you.
after year, you just keep getting better looking. And
Thank you, Mike.
of course, the silver puted, big dicked physician over here.
He's a great husband and he's a great lover.
Oh, Mike.
I wish my
Whoa.
wife could say the same
That
thing.
helps. That helps.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. And now those who are asking who you are saying they're very happy to have seen you and met you, and so am I. So it's after 3 o'clock this afternoon Pacific time, Susan's show. I don't know that if you don't need me on the show
Check it out, everybody.
today, right? You're good without me? Yes?
I'm sorry, what'd you
You
say?
don't need me today on that show, on
Not
your show.
really. You're the sound guy, but you're going to help
I'm
Robin
the
with
sound guy? Okay, well, I'll be around this afternoon at 3 o'clock, so I'm helping out. And Mike, thanks for coming
Yes,
by.
thanks for having
And best to you. By the way, I had a one quick second. I understand your daughter's going to a new school.
Yes.
And I know Mike's parents very well, and we were talking about her. And I go, to my eye, that young lady is crazy smart. And your mom just goes, like scary smart, too smart.
Well, it's concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, but also like everyone says that about their kids, right? Oh,
No.
my daughter's beautiful. But,
She's not my kid. I can see it on the post you guys put up together.
She's going to a new school
Yeah.
because they took her out of her school that we initially got her into when we moved and put her into a STEM-focused school.
Yeah.
She's like the little
Yeah.
You know,
She's next. I could tell.
which
I
is
could
great because I'm me.
You got some good horsepower too. Caleb, anything for in your end? Before we wrap up,
No,
sorry to keep you on so long.
Excited for Susan's show. We're going to be getting that ready next.
All right, beautiful. See you guys then, 3 o'clock today.
That's why I love
otherwise,
Caleb so much.
quickly put up the schedule for next week because we got a bunch of good guests coming up. Sorry to do this to everybody. There we are. So Tuesday, Drea DeMatteo. You know Drea?
Nice.
Michael Gates
Do
coming back. I thought we had Rob Schneider on Monday. No?
no, we couldn't make it.
Oh, damn. Dr. Mockery and Laura Trump coming in, Greg Lukianoff, Matt Walsh, just Penelope Ann Miller was the co-host
mackerel.
in the Reagan movie, and she has some thoughts about that. So we'll get into all that and more. So be with us. I will see you next on Monday, but I'll be here also at 3 o'clock with Susan today.
Thank you.
See you then.
See you later.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.